In his book, The Bridges at Toko-Ri, novelist James Michener writes movingly of the heroes who fought in the Korean conflict. In the book's final scene, an admiral stands on the darkened bridge of his carrier waiting for pilots he knows will never return from their mission. And as he waits, he asks in the silent darkness,
"Where do we get such men? They leave this ship, do the job, and they must find this speck lost somewhere on the sea. When they find it, they have to land on its pitching deck. Where do we get such men?"
In 1908, Orville Wright conducted demonstration flights for the U.S. Army at Fort Myer outside Washington, D.C. The U.S. Navy ordered Lieutenant George C. Sweet to investigate these demonstrations, and after his observation, he quickly reported the airplane would prove invaluable in naval warfare. By 1910, aviation pioneer Glenn Curtiss had his own exhibition team. His skilled pilot, Eugene Ely, proved to the U.S. Navy the aircraft could be functional on Navy ships. He validated that both the sky and sea could be synchronized into an impressive force, and naval aviation was born. In 1911, $25,000 was appropriated by the U.S. Navy to purchase 3 airplanes and training for 3 naval officers: Lieutenant Theodore Ellison, Lieutenant J.G. John Towers, and Lieutenant John Rogers. They became the Navy's first 3 naval aviators and set in motion a unique form of airmanship that continues to produce naval officers with extraordinary heroism and inspiring leadership.
The last reminder, Scott. This is one of the few things where the first time you do it, you've got to do it right.
Naval aviation's triumphant achievement in assimilating the all-powerful synergy of both sea and air has produced legends who set the standard. Heroes such as Medal of Honor recipients David McCampbell and James Stockdale, the first American in space, Alan B. Shepard, and the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. These heroes of the past have joined their shipmates in heaven, but are firmly in place in the legends of carrier aviation. And like them, a whole new generation of legends live on. Meet the only Navy ace to have scored combat victories in both the European and Pacific theaters of World War II. At 100, Dean "Diz" Laird was not only a legendary World War II ace, but served in the Navy's first jet squadron in 1947 and achieved the record for most arrested landings on a straight-deck carrier.
Well, I completed flight training in September 42 and was sent to Norfolk to report to my squadron, VF-41. The squadron was attached to the USS Ranger, CV-4. Ranger was the first carrier built from the keel up as a carrier. All the rest of them that we had were conversions of from some other type of ship. We did a lot of training there in the Norfolk area, getting acquainted with Wildcat, and then got underway again, heading east. That day, we met up with the Queen Mary, which was heading west, and we were told that they had Churchill aboard. He was headed for Halifax for a meeting with President Roosevelt, who was flying in from Washington. So we flew cover for the Queen Mary, and we finally hit land again. We went into Scapa Flow in Scotland, which was the home port of the British Home Fleet, where we became a part of the British Home Fleet, operating under the control of Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, who was the Home Fleet commander. And we went out and operated with units of the Home Fleet up and down the Norwegian coast. We went up pretty far because it would get very cold. There was ice in the water, and we were inside the Arctic Circle. They didn't really keep us too well informed as to what was happening or what we could expect to run into. Finally, we got into some action, and we were launched and vectored out where we relieved a unit ahead of us on station as the Combat Air Patrol. The weather was not that good. There were many clouds and heavy clouds in some cases. And we were vectored out after the bogey. Well, we couldn't find it it was so cloudy. Out from behind the one quite large cloud is here, and from around and behind it came this airplane, and he came around the front, and I recognized it as not one of our friends, so I tally-hoed. So we headed for him in full speed, and he saw us coming, and he turned and headed south. I figure he was heading for friendly territory, such as Germany, because I recognized it as a German Junkers 88, which was a very good airplane. Finally caught up to him, and I got to thinking, instead of picking part of the engine or any other part of the airplane, I would aim for that juncture of the wing and the fuselage. You'd have these fuel tanks in the wings. I'm up here, I came down and I aimed for that spot. With all 6 guns I opened up, because I had to aim out here. Took the lead that I figured I needed and squeezed the trigger, and I guessed right. Well, I could see my tracers hitting right exactly where I wanted them. And then I came in, I got about in this position on him, and all of a sudden the airplane just exploded. It was a huge ball of fire, and I flew through a bunch of small parts of German airplane that were flying in all directions. I couldn't avoid them. Fortunately, I didn't hit any of them, and I recognized engine parts, like I saw piston rods and things like that I flew by, and he just disappeared in that whole ball of fire.
The power and presence of naval aviation was proven to the world during World War II. 5 years later, it would be affirmed again in Korea. Carriers moved overnight to provide close air support to outnumbered forces when South Korea was suddenly invaded by Communist North. Meet another centenarian who is not only a legendary naval aviator, but a prominent rear admiral renowned for his brilliant leadership.
Okay, well, my name is actually Donovan Brown Shelton. I served for 40 years in the Navy, and I was proud to do it. And I served in 3 wars. World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And my favorite mission was in Korea in 1951, March the 3rd. I was on a night interdiction mission with a fellow named Hot Dog Mayfield. That was a night interdiction meeting flying F4U-5Ns. I was a night fighter pilot all my career. And so I was taking off from the Princeton, which was about 65, 70 miles off the coast in the Sea of Japan from Wonsan. So we would take off, in this case at 3 o'clock in the morning, and fly west to Wonsan, circle Wonsan for connections and so forth, and then we would fly at 8,000 feet up the coast and make it hard for the trains and the trucks and so forth that were carrying goods south. And we always had good luck. There was always trains, or always trucks, or always cars on the road and on the railroad headed south. They had been doing that very recently. And so this night interdiction was a new thing. But anyway, I got up to Hungnam okay, came back to Wonsan, and started to make a circle, and my engine quit. So I didn't know quite what to do at first, and I called the ship and said, I think I'll try to call to get back to the ship. Will you connect me with the LSO, who was Bill Spell? And Bill Spell and I had done a lot of night work together, and I had tried the idle button, the start button, and by punching it here, I could get the engine to run at idle, which was about 1,000 RPM. But I could get the engine to run at idle, and I could get a good glide going. So I did that, and I headed to the ship. I got to the ship at 3,200 feet using the punch thing on the idle button. And I checked in, started my pass, and Bill Spell was there, of course, and I landed and made the 3-wire, believe it or not, 5 o'clock in the morning at night.
On October 31st, 2021, Admiral Don Shelton peacefully began his last eternal watch. And in heaven, as he did on earth, he once again soars the high untrespassed sanctity of space to touch the face of God. Meet 96 years young Royce Williams. His legendary mission was finally declassified and is what Hollywood blockbuster movies are made from. His amazing story you're about to hear remained top secret for over 50 years and is why he's been nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor.
As a little child, my brother and I had discussed amongst us, we agreed we wanted to be naval aviators. And we both were. I don't know, I came from the Midwest, so it wasn't the love of the sea, but it became the love of the sea. I liked being a sailor. One day in North Korea, about 100 miles from Vladivostok, Russia, Soviet Union, and it wasn't supposed to happen. I flew an early mission against a target at the Yalu River, which separates North Korea and the Soviet Union. And there were a lot of airplanes involved because we had 3 carriers operating together. As a result, as expected, I would think, the Soviets got very upset. And they started flying a lot of airplanes and making a lot of chatter on their radios and so forth. But they didn't fly at sea, and they had not participated in the Korean War, and we didn't consider them a threat. Well, when I landed, they said, take a quick lunch and come back, you got the next mission. It was a combat air patrol. I'm flying with 3 other guys that I know, but I've never flown with before. But we knew what we were to do. The weather was messy in a blizzard with the ceiling, the base of the clouds at about 400 to 500 feet snow, and the tops of those clouds at 12,000 feet. So we got a briefing. We took off and joined up under the clouds and then climbed as a formation to on top of the clouds at 12,000 feet. Well, while we were in the clouds, we received information from our Combat Information Center that there were inbound bogies, meaning unknown aircraft. So, popping on top, I looked to the north, and I could see 7 contrails all in one formation. At that point, the flight leader had a problem with his airplane, but he was directed with his wingman to come back and remain over the ship. So I took the lead, and I had a wingman, and I charged my guns, checked everything ready to fight, and raring to go. Fired the test round. And as the airplanes came over us, I identified them as MiG-15s. As they did that, they returned reverse, and I thought probably going back to land. They were probably at least 50,000 feet, an area that my airplane couldn't reach. And when I got to 26,000 feet, I was still tracking them, but they were very speedy, and they were probably 70 miles ahead of me. And at that point, the formation split, with 4 airplanes turning off to the right and 3 to the left. And what it turned out to be, they were going to bracket me. I reported to Combat Information Center, CIC, that I'd lost contact with these airplanes. And they said so had they, as they became a smaller radar target. Anyway, I was directed to reverse, come back and establish a barricade between the last sighting of the airplanes and the task force. Well, in that turn, 4 of them came in at my 10 o'clock position, 12 o'clock here and 10 o'clock over here. And they were all firing. And I turned hard into them as they swept by, and I got within range and got my sights on the number 4 guy, fired a short blast, and he went down. At that point, my wingman left me to track this airplane, and 3 others came in from the other side, so I'm now alone with 6 of them. It's a long story. It took place for about 35 minutes, whereas most aerial combat is from seconds to less than 5 minutes for sure. Well, the remaining 3 that first attacked me pulled up abruptly to probably 2,000 feet above me, and I was still sort of tracking them. At that point, they turned around, and I was going to try and shoot the guy that just lost his wingman, but he was in the sun, and I saw the other 2, included their original flight leader, had turned around and were coming in, and they were shooting already. I thought a little out of range, but I changed and aimed at the lead guy, and when I thought I was in range, I fired again a short burst, and he stopped shooting, and he turned left, no longer attacking me, but his wingman was, so I switched on him, and we exchanged fire, and he was firing just a short burst when he quit firing, and he just kept coming and slid underneath me while I continued to shoot at him. It's my assumption that he was dead. There was no maneuvering or anything. Well, we're down to 5, and instead of being in a formation, they're operating singly, taking their turn. And I was flying at a level altitude, 26,000 feet, full power. It was a matter of evasion, of one airplane at a time. I was watching him at my tail, maneuvering to ruin his hope to shoot me down. And as he would go by, they would normally climb again at a fantastic rate of climb. And my attention, since he was not able to follow that act, was to see who's next and go through the same thing time after time. Well, one of them came by at a rather flat instead of climbing, and I was able to turn on him and shoot at a very close range, and parts of his airplane were coming off and everything, and I had to maneuver violently to keep from running into him. Well, more of the same, getting dull. They're just repeating the same thing, the same type of attack, and go whirl away above me. Another one was, for me, a possible, I thought, and I tracked him and I fired as he was starting to go out of range, but he started smoking and slowing down, and I ran out of ammunition. And lo and behold, I saw another MiG right coming in on me. I made a hard turn to get away from it, but he hit me with a 37 millimeter cannon right in the button of the wing and fuselage. And the damage was that when it exploded in the accessory section of the engine, shooting away the cable for control of the rudder and knocking out all the hydraulics. It exploded in the accessory section. So I was damaged goods, and the airplane was harder to fly, being out of ammunition. I probably almost out of fuel. I didn't bother checking the fuel. It had nothing I was going to do about it. So I dove for the clouds that were covering the task force. And my elevator was working perfectly. And so I would, 2 hands on the stick, abruptly pull up. And once I got to the level I wanted, and the guy was starting to get his gun sight on me again, and I would push over and dive. And I made a series of these things until I got into the clouds. Well, once in there, I lost sight of the guy behind me, who was in perfect range, probably 400 feet. And I started count my blessings and see what I ought to worry about, whether I was going to have to jump, which would have been fatal because the winter conditions, survival, although I had a survival suit on, I'd probably last less than 20 minutes. So I knew the bottoms of the clouds. So I just descended carefully until I was in the clear. And I was talking to the CIC that I'm inbound and damaged. And they said they're getting the flight deck ready because they were about to launch another attack on the targets ashore. So it took maybe 10 minutes or so, which gave me time to find out my problems. And part of it was that I had very little directional control, and that below speeds of 170 knots, I would lose control of the airplane and start stalling out. Fragments from the warhead of the 37 millimeter cannon, there were 263. So I passed that information to the ship, and when I got the signal Charlie that it's cleared to land, I was in a position behind the ship and pointed at it, but not without being at quite an angle to my landing platform, the flight deck. So I notified them again, I'm coming in hot, and the LSO says to the commanding officer of the ship, he's coming in hot, can you kick it up a bit? Well, there was a lot of wind from the big storm we were in, and besides that, the ship can add another 30 knots, so he says, bring him in any speed he wants. And the next thing I'm saying, I can't line up. And the LSO said, well, I'll cut you for an early wire. But the width of the ship was not landing space, and I knew I'd be going over the side. But the captain, being a knowledgeable naval aviator, turned the ship and lined it up with me, and I made a good landing.
Because of the unique flexibility of the carrier and its ability to deliver lethal force to 85% of the Earth's land area from the air, there's not a target that can't be rapidly eliminated when called upon. In the 1960s, naval aviation would take the lead.
I loved the challenge of carrier aviation. This one mission, going to be 6 A4s going against this surface-to-air missile site there. There was one other F-8 and I. We were both flak suppressors. We got there. The groups of 3 split off. The ones from north to south dropped their bombs. They had good, accurate hits. guys from south to north then dropping their bombs, and the place lit up. Anti-aircraft fire, really heavy. I called my lead, Cactus Jack, and I said, Cactus, there's an 85 there, I'm going to take it. He said, okay. So I went up and I started my run down. I got the nose down, got a really good aim point going, had the speed I wanted, and all of a sudden I just felt this kind of a bump, bump. After the bump, the whole airframe was shaking, so I knew I'd been hit. Oh, I went ahead and fired what I had left at the 85. Then I pulled up and headed back toward the east, and that's the direction of the coast. And I said to Cactus, I said, I've been hit back here. He said, how serious is it? I said, I have no idea, but I think it's serious. So he said, I'll come take a look. So he did a big U-turn, came around. He said, shit, you're on fire. You better get out of that damn thing. I said, well, it's running okay right now. I want to get as far away as I can. I didn't want to go down right there because they'd be a little hostile. So I got up to 11,000 feet. I got up to 450 knots. It's almost 500 miles an hour. Finally, he really got excited, and he said, it's going to blow. Go now, go, don't wait. Yeah, it's really a shit. It scared me enough. I just went ahead. I just let go and just pulled and ejected. All the other airplanes knew where I was. God bless them. This is what I love. I'm going to tear up. They fly by and give me the finger and rock their wings. And so then I started trying to give them the finger. Got the raft here, and I'm trying to give them back. That was like a shot, like a shot of energy. Just knowing that they cared. They knew where I was. I'm sorry. So I felt safe. I really, really felt safe. I had survived the ejection. I was in one piece, basically. Not very well held together at this moment, but still I was all in one piece. But only about half mile ahead of me, maybe even a quarter of a mile, were all of these junks, these fishing boats. Guy standing with an AK-47, he fired 3 bursts off to my right side. And they had a net thrown over the side of the thing. There's just one other guy that I saw there. And they were yelling and pointing at the net. So I pushed my raft over there as best I could. I didn't disconnect from it. I'd left it attached to my body, and I tried to climb up on this net, and I had trouble doing it. I couldn't use my left arm. I felt heavy as hell. Kept getting my foot tangled in the net as trying to climb on board, and he was getting more and more anxious, I think, and impatient. And I got my upper body over the railing, and he swung and hit me with a rifle butt and broke my nose and knocked a tooth in right here. Anyway, so I rolled onto the deck then, was able to stand up, and I just lifted my arm over my head to surrender. The other guy on the boat then came and walked up and took the 38 from I had a 38 revolver around my waist in a holster. It's the one that the Navy issued us. And he went back over sort of toward the center of the boat and crouched down. And now I'm facing this young man with the AK-47. He wasn't practiced at what he was trying to do there, I could tell. He was thinking about that, and I could see this A1 coming. He was so low, he was almost hitting the wave tops with his prop. So I just moved my foot back to brace myself, and all of a sudden, here he is. That A1 comes over. It was loud. You could smell the exhaust and feel the prop wash, and the guy with the AK-47 was completely surprised. When that happened, he curled up into a ball and fell down onto the deck and clammed up, just like he'd rolled into a ball. Well, my wife had bought me a .22 caliber Ruger automatic weapon that I carried in the diagonal zipper pocket of my flight suit. I thought, this is my last chance. So my left hand was practically inoperative because of my left shoulder pain, but I thought maybe I could cock the pistol. You have to pull the receiver back to cock it, then every time you pull the trigger, it'll fire. But it had to be cocked, and I was concerned with my left hand that I wouldn't be able to grip it tightly enough. So I decided, we had leg restraint straps around above and below our knees as part of our ejection seat paraphernalia. And those remained with us. They would bang together when we walked. We called them fighter pilot spurs because you could hear the things. So I thought if I put that pistol against it with the receiver against that, it's a triple thick canvas webbing that goes around the knee, that strap. I could push down with my hand. I didn't have to grip it as such. Push down and get enough leverage to get the thing cocked. Pulled it out. He still wasn't looking. I put it down and I got it cocked on the first try. I guess my motion caught his attention because he looked up at me holding a pistol in my hand, and he had just seen the guy take a pistol from me. He turned and looked at his buddy like, where did that come from? He knew he had taken a pistol from me, and here I'm standing holding one. And then I guess he decided it didn't matter how I got it, but the fact that I did have, he started to turn the AK-47 toward me, and I shot him. I was at very close range. No more than 6-8 feet away. Not even that much, maybe 6 feet. So I couldn't miss. I hit him just above his right eye. This is hard. His head rocked back. I hit him just below his right eye. Then his head rocked back forward again, and I shot him one more time right in the top of the head. And he made a sound I will never forget. Kind of a combination of a moan and a belch. And he fell forward and hit his face first onto the deck, and something slid across and hit me in the toe of my right boot. And I looked, and it was a piece of his jawbone with 2 teeth attached. This was a young man about my age. I was 25. And I was thinking, under other circumstances, he and I could have very easily have been sitting by a table at a sidewalk looking at pretty girls walking by and drinking beer. He didn't want to be there, I'm sure, any more than I did. And I actually said, I'm sorry. And I meant it. So the other guy who had taken the .38 revolver saw me shoot his buddy. He raised the .38 and pointed it at me and pulled the trigger, and this is one of the miracles of my life. About 6 weeks before this, a guy in our sister squadron was showing everybody how quickly he could draw a pistol, and he accidentally fired off a round in the ready room. It became policy to only carry 4 rounds in that revolver, so that the one under the hammer, in case you drop it on the hammer, it won't fire. And then the first chamber past that, if you pull the trigger, it will fall on an empty chamber and it won't fire. Then you have 4 shots left. And that's the condition my pistol was in when he had it. So when I shot his friend, he raises the pistol, pulled the trigger, it didn't fire, so he dropped it and jumped in the water. So now I am in command of my own fishing boat as such. I still had the yellow lanyard attached to my harness. Bouncing against the side of this boat was my raft, and pretty soon I saw a helicopter coming from the east. And so as he was approaching, he said, "Clear your raft, swim clear of your raft." So I finally let go of my raft. I unhooked it from my harness, and they came into a hover, and here's this horse collar. So I just put my right arm through and I tried to lock it down, and the guy saw that I was having trouble, so he just lifted me up. I was hanging on with this thing under my right elbow. I was not going to let go. If I died, I wasn't going to let go. He got me up then into the helicopter, took me back to the ship. What a heartwarming thing. They put me down. The guy helped me get out of the thing, and a young seaman came over to lead me away, and he came over and he yells at me. I said, "Welcome home, sir," he says.
I went to the A4 replacement air group to learn how to fly the A4, and then went to the fleet in VA 164, the Ghost Riders, and Air Wing 16 aboard USS Oriskany. And Air Wing 16 came to be known as Bloody 16 because we had the highest loss rate of any carrier since World War II. It just was a matter of timing and targets that we took the brunt of it because we got there in the summer of '67. And the first week we lost, I think it was 5 airplanes and 3 pilots. And it was because we were doing 3 Alpha strikes a day, to the big targets in Hanoi and Haiphong. And it was day after day, and losing a lot of people. So that was our introduction to combat. I mean, we got thrown right to the Dragon. Through that, I only got hit 3 times on that first cruise, and they were smaller holes and didn't really affect the airplanes flying. But on the second cruise, Johnson had instigated the bombing halt above the 20th parallel. And those of us that had gone through the combat of the first cruise thought, boy, this is a piece of cake now. So we're not going to Haiphong and Hanoi. There were still some bad places there. So this one flight, we had a new guy, a replacement pilot on board. He was senior to me, a lieutenant commander. So I let him lead, but I said, I'm going to be telling you basically where to go, what to avoid, and all that. And I said, we're going into this little bridge to try to knock it down. And I said, but don't go over Tam Da on the way into this place. It was on a direct route to the target. I said, don't go there because we think it's a gunnery school. Because every time you go near that place, they'll shoot at you, and they're good. So we go in, and what does he do but goes right by Tam Da. And I'm just about to key the mic to say, we got to go north a little bit. And boom, 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 boom. Right on our altitude, but they were off a little bit on the azimuth, big black puffs of 85 millimeter. And so I called the brake, which is, an evasive maneuver, and we get back on track to the target. We go over the ridge and drop the bridge, and we come back the same damn way. And here I was thinking, well, I had a wingman on my wing. I was leading the second section. I thought, well, should we just sit back and watch the show and let him go over Tam Da, or should I tell him again? And about that time, the 2 sections were separated. But you always had a combat spread so that one missile, one piece of flak wouldn't kill 2 airplanes, 2 birds with 1 stone thing. Anyway, we're separated and right on altitude, right in between the 2 sections, 5 bursts of 85 millimeter, the big black bursts, And so I called brake right for their section, and then I called brake left for me and my wingman. And just as I got my airplane up about 100 degrees of bank, maybe, kaboom, this 85 millimeter shell hits my drop tank and goes on through, which means the proximity fuse didn't work, the contact fuse didn't work, and the fuel-air mixture of what was left in my drop tank was not right for an explosion. And the thing went up. Oh, and the other thing was, if I was in any other degree of bank, it would have hit the airplane. It would have gone up through the drop tank and hit the airplane. I wouldn't be sitting here. Anyway, so it goes up and it blows up above the airplane. And I was already on my back. There was like 74 holes in the bottom of the airplane. Didn't hit anything vital, no fuel tanks or anything like that. And I didn't actually know if I was hit or not, because I just felt this when it hit the drop tank. I went up sideways, and it was like somebody just lifted the airplane up. And then this thing blows up above me. And I thought, so I said, the big thing in naval aviation is it's better to die than embarrass yourself. So I said, I think I'm hit. And headed for the coast. And normal procedure is for your wingman to come and check you over. You check each other over for battle damage. So my wingman Mike comes up alongside. I said, would you check me over close? Something happened there. And he just comes up there, and the next thing I heard was, holy cow. That was an expression we used a lot, holy cow. It was something like that. So there was, when I got back, the hole was like that big through the drop tank. And it was just, that was pure luck on so many levels of luck, you know, or else I wouldn't be here.
The most memorable carry mission was on July 23rd, 1967, when, as a Iron Hand lead in a strike group on the Zata POL storage area on Highway 15 between Hanoi and the Chinese border. I'm the lead pouncer. I have a Crusader wingman. We have 4 Crusaders in the flight as TARCAP, and en route to the target, we are bounced by 8, count them 8, North Korean MiG-17s. We did not find out that those MiG-17s were North Koreans until 20 years later, because U.S. Intel plays I've got a secret. Anyhow, the fight ensued. One of the Crusaders shoots down one. I'm up and out of it when I'm alerted to this and say, shit, there's 8 of them back there, and I put the throttle to it and got up over the fight. One of the fighters shoots one down, another fighter shoots at one, and his missile goes for the tailpipe of a Crusader and lops off his starboard UHT. So there's 1 wounded Crusader. There's 2 MiGs down at this time. The 3rd MiG is shot down by my wingman, Timmy Hubbard, who was battling a 17. Put every bullet he had in and around him. Shot him with a Sidewinder that didn't get him. Put every Zuni he had at him, and the airplane started to fly apart. And Tim pulled up beside him and gave him the finger, and when he did, the canopy came off, the kid jumped out, and the airplane exploded. And Tim says, I'm ammo minus, I'm bingo. And the bombers haven't got to the target. The bombers bombed to the target. We've got 3 guys in chutes, 2 wounded Crusaders. On the way out, the lead Crusader, Page Boy 1, is being attacked by 2 MiGs, and he says, I've got 2 behind me, I'm on fire. I look around and find him, and I said, Red, who's the flight leader, turn right. I didn't want him to go to China. It'd have been an ugly SAR. I swoop across the circle, load up 1 Zuni, and put the Zuni right between the 2 MiGs that were shooting, and Red right in front of him, and it scared the MiGs off. They went home, we all went home, and we went back and debriefed on the ship.
April 24th of 67, I was on a bar cap, a Barrier Combat Air Patrol, which is just boring holes in the sky, and got a recall. So we came back to the ship and they said, you're late for the brief. We're going to KEP. It was a typical way the war was run from Washington. Johnson and McNamara ran a crappy war, let me tell you. You know, they dictated the targets from Washington, and here we're going on the KEP airfield, the first time we're ever striking the MiG air base, and we get short notice to do it. So I'm in the brief, you know, and the skipper handpicked who we wanted on the strike. And so we were 6 planes of TARCAP, which means you're capping right near the target for the bombers. So I get up to my airplane and I said, I got 1 Sidewinder. And Chief says, I'm sorry, we were in a rush on a turnaround. That's all we could get, had time to get you, and not you got a bad wing station. So we got 1 Sidewinder. There's no gun on the F4. So off we go. So we had an Alpha Strike, which is about 24 airplanes of bombers and strike airplanes and TARCAP airplanes. And so we coasted in by Cam Pha, and the 85 millimeters start going off. You can tell 85 from 37 by the color of the smoke, for one thing. 37 millimeter is kind of a grayish, and it's much more repetitive. And the 85 millimeters get a little higher, and they're black puffs of smoke. So we could go through that for a while, and we turned in towards Kep, which is 37 miles northeast of Hanoi. We started circling. The skipper decided we're going to tar cap over this railroad line, which is the main supply line from China to Hanoi. And I think it had about a gun an inch on the thing. I mean, it was just stuff coming up like crazy, like goofballs. But I couldn't believe we didn't get hit by these things. And so Charlie Plumb actually did take a hit. He lost an engine. So the skipper says, Charlie, you can get by yourself. So he's, okay, skipper. And so he takes off back towards Cam Pha, and he's down low. He ends up, he says, I got MiGs on my tail. So John Holm, who was my section leader, department head in the squadron, and I take off to go help Charlie. And we get most of the way towards Charlie, and he says, I eluded them. They run out of things to shoot at me. I'm okay. I'm going to be feet wet. So we turn back towards the target then. But before we left, an A6 piloted by Royce Williams came off the target on fire, and I saw them eject. So when we came back in, I'm hearing this guy on the radio saying there's MiGs coming up the valley. And I found out later it was Irv on the ground with his emergency radio telling us there were MiGs coming up the valley before he got captured. So suddenly there's MiGs everywhere. The MiGs were chasing the A4s coming off the target, and we start scrambling with them. And I to this day, I don't know how many there were. There were a lot. 6, maybe more. And they were in a Loughbury circle. And what their tactic I soon quickly figured out was there are so many of them, and a MiG-17 can really turn if it's flown right. And they're flying in a circle. And so I used the vertical. So the fight was from basically the ground to about 5,000 feet with these MiGs down in a circle. So I'm just going up, down, and every time I went vertical, Gary Anderson was in my back seat, and I said, Gary, as we get in, loosen your straps and so you can turn around and see. And I would rotate the airplane back and forth to check our 6 and make sure nobody was on it as we went vertical. And then, it was like a chess game. I was trying to time my turn to come back in where I had an opportunity to use that one sidewinder I had. And so as I was coming back in, I had a guy back here who had been trying to play and hoping he would get up like this. I look up ahead, and there's an F4 with a MiG right on his tail. And I wasn't sure whether it was Ev Southwick or John Holm. So I yelled, I said, Linfield, which is our call sign, break port. And so as he broke, the other MiG back here must have called what was going on to the MiG on Ev's tail, because Ev was busy shooting a MiG down. And the old adage goes back to Rickenbacker in World War I. If you focus for 15 seconds on the guy who's shooting, somebody's going to get you never saw before. And that's exactly what was happening. So the guy calls the MiG to turn, and so he does the MiG, just when he's going really fast, is a really slow, it was like slow speed. Sidewinder tone, hose off my one signer when I had a sweet tone at about a half a mile, and his slow turn caused it right up the tailpipe. Ba-boom. Most of the tail comes off and is smoking, and I see him going back down towards the ground. Ev now has shot his MiG down, and he's, I can't transfer my wing fuel. So I don't know why he didn't have it transferred to start with. Beats the hell out of me. Maybe couldn't transfer it, period. I don't know. But it's 4,000 pounds of gas in the wings that he couldn't use. So he's got to go out now at max conserve, which is 250 knots. So here we are, we're in North Vietnam at 250 knots, and I'm doing a weave behind him, protecting him. I look back, and there's another MiG circling over the one I just shot down. And to this day, I just regret not going back and hosing off a Sparrow at that guy.
The most memorable probably was the day I was shot down. But there's a better story. About 2 weeks before I was shot down, we were on a target. It was Kep Airfield. It was the first time we got, you've heard of Kep, because a lot of guys have been on Kep. And it was the first time that we could go in and actually bomb the enemy's runways. and these MiGs would come up and it was their territory. You know, we were 100 miles out at sea, and we had to fly into their territory, and they would launch these MiGs off these runways, and they'd come up and harass us. And so we're getting into we're probably 30 miles from Kep, all right? And I take a anti-aircraft shell in my starboard engine. 57 millimeter shell blows a hole about that big in engine, and not only did it set the engine on fire, but it took out one of the missiles. Actually, it torched off one of my Sparrow missiles. So I got a missile hanging on the airplane, which is burning. And then, in addition to that, it punched a hole in one of my fuel tanks. So I'm on skipper's wing, and he looks over there and he sees what's going on, and he said, "Going back to the ship, you know, you can't help us here." So I got this airplane. I got one engine on fire. I got holes, obviously, big holes in the airplane. I'm losing fuel out of this one tank, and I point the nose of the airplane back towards the beach. Kep is, I don't know, 100 miles maybe from the beach. And so I'm looking, because I know that if I can get over the water, even if I have to punch out of this jet, my co-pilot and I are going to be okay. And so I'm looking for the water, you know. I'm sitting there going as fast as I can with this engine, and the fire went out on my starboard engine, so I'm okay there. But I still only have one engine. And so I finally see, I said, Don Monk was my radar intercept officer. Don, I said, I can see the beach. We're going to be okay. He said, Charlie, you got 3 MiGs at 1 o'clock high. I got 3 MiG-17s that are coming in on me. Okay, I didn't think that was fair. You know, I want to get back to the ship. You know? And here they go, and they come down. And of course, I am a wounded duck to start with. I only have one engine, and I got a hole in the airplane, and I'm leaking fuel. So here they come, and I start to hassle with these guys. Now, I don't know how low I really was, but I have this memory that I was looking up at the insulators on telephone poles. I was that low. And so I'm hassling with these guys. Okay, now from an F4, the F4 was designed as a high-altitude supersonic interceptor. We were a Mach 2 airplane. We were supposed to go faster than anything in the air, okay? So they didn't think that a pilot ever needed to see behind him because nothing was ever gonna be back there. And so my visibility, the visibility for an F4 Phantom is from about probably 4 o'clock to about 8 o'clock. You can't see anything behind you. You got an ejection seat, you got your back seater, and you got all this airplane. So I can't see these guys. I got them cornered on my 6 o'clock position, but I can't see them. Don Monk, my radar intercept officer, he can't see back either. He had unstrapped, totally 6 places, you're strapped in that seat, 6 places. He had unstrapped and got back. He's kneeled down on his ejection seat, looking out the back of the airplane. Okay, so he's reaching over to his microphone. He's telling me, he's calling the MiGs. And he said, "Okay, Charlie, you got one coming. Okay, it's 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Oh, it's 6 o'clock. Missiles away." The MiG shot his heat-seeking missile at me, and I knew it. Well, I'm thinking the heat seeker, my starboard engine is dead. I've got my port engine in full afterburner. Okay, that missile is on my afterburner. I said, I just shut off the engine. I shut off my port engine. Now, this F4 Phantom can go 1,400 miles an hour, but when you got no power on it, it comes down like a greased anvil. I mean, we started to fall. But by this time, I had turned around and I could see that missile, and the thing just went ballistic. It just tumbled out of the sky. What a great relief that was. I hit the igniter, started my good engine again, pulled up the other side of the turn. Those 3 MiGs shot 2 of their atolls apiece. I dodged 6 missiles that day because my radar intercept officer, Don Monk, was kneeling in his seat, looking back and calling these MiGs. So anyway, I'm getting low on fuel, coming back to the ship, all right? The challenge is still not over, right? I only got one engine and I'm running out of gas fast. Again, my backseater saved my tail again. He called the ship and said, send a tanker out to us. We're not gonna make it back to the ship. We got a tank. We were over an undercast. We were 25,000 feet or so, and we were an undercast, so we couldn't see the ship or a tanker or anybody else. My backseater vectored this tanker in and vectored me around, turned me to port, turned the tanker to starboard. I put out the probe to plug in, and I had 300 pounds of jet fuel. The emergency light comes on at 2,100 pounds, and the A3 tanker pops out of the cloud. He's got the basket there for me to plug into perfectly. I mean, it couldn't have been more perfect. I plug in to the drogue and start taking on gas. Okay, so I got enough to get back to the ship. I'm still not calm yet. My flaps weren't working, and so I got to make a no flap, single engine pass. It's going to be faster than normal. So, sure enough, you know, I by that time I had 100 carrier landings. I think I can do this. So I bring around and come down, perfect landing on the ship. And man, am I glad to be aboard the ship.
In 1968, I had made 2 combat cruises to Vietnam, and fairly outspoken guy, as you might imagine, and came back from a very tough cruise on Enterprise. I think we lost 11 guys in 17 days. The Air Wing did on Enterprise. And a lot of guys were getting out of the Navy and joining the airlines. They were paying about twice as much. But considering how I came about my Navy career, I stayed in. And I was head of tactics at Miramar, San Diego, in Fighter Squadron 121, which was the mother rag, the training place for all Phantom drivers in the Navy. So one day, I got a call. The skipper wanted to see me and brought me in. And he said, we just got this unsolicited report from CNO about, it's called the Alt Report, written by Frank Alt, who was the CO of the carrier Coral Sea at the time. And of course, we're about 5 years into the war by that time. So it's getting old, especially being run by McNamara and LBJ, tell me how much they knew. The young guys always end up fighting the war anyhow for the older guys. So skipper called me in. He says, read this portion of the Alt Report. Said, almost quote verbatim, at NAS Miramar, start 2 graduate schools, one for the F-8 aircraft and one for the F-4 aircraft. 2 graduate schools, get well programs, if you will, to change things out here during the war in the carrier Navy. So I thought, holy mackerel, what a job. And he said, will you do it? And I said, how much time? He said, they've asked for it in 60 days. Now you got to remember, this is a graduate school. They've been training guys for 5 years in the Phantom, but it's got to be a level of changes to change the war out there. So I had about 15, 16 guys, all really talented airplane drivers, great combat experience with me. So I looked at what I thought needed to be done very rapidly. Only had 2 months. And I thought, you can't go to the Bureau of Personnel and ask for people. It'll take months to get them. So I used 9 of us from tactics phase, all combat guys, handpicked them, and all of them had a unique, they had some unique ability in addition to their flying. Number one thing, you got to be able to teach it at the level that the Navy wanted now. Joe's a famous Mel Holmes, best aerodynamics guy I ever met, and a great phantom pilot. I've known him most of my flying life. And Jerry Sawatzki, big Polish kid, is an animal in an airplane. And people were afraid of him. Smash Nash. He got his call sign for a good reason, Smash. He was unbeatable. He said, I'd rather die than lose. And these guys all brought Jimmy Rulison, a brilliant man on radar and weapon systems. He knew it all. And what he didn't know, he knew the questions to ask. So J.C. Smith, the best RO backseater I could find. I'd flown with him a lot. Jimmy Lang, been shot down twice in the backseat of Phantoms in his 2 cruises and lived. And these guys are good. Darryl Gary, who went on to be my lifelong friend. He was a JG in those days and had 3 additional tours at Top Gun when it got up and was running. You know, the war had been going on. We didn't have any place. We didn't have any building. We didn't have a training room. We didn't have any place for our flight gear or anything. So Steve Smith, he was a backseater, but he really should have been a felon. He can get anything done on any given day. And he was my admin guy, and he flew with all of us. But I told him, I said on Friday afternoon, I said, Steve-O, we got to find a place. I said, I know where there's some old buildings, Quonset hut-like buildings. I said, I want you to go down and talk to him, get us one. And that's where we started Top Gun. And we just, by hook or crook, we got it done. Greatest friendships you ever had. Best fraternity of guys I've ever had. In 60 days, we looked at everything, saw obviously the kill ratio up to that point in Vietnam was 2-to-1. We shot down 2 of them for every one of us that they got. We started bringing the classes in. Our students were from fleet squadrons. We sent out to the COs and said, send us the very best front seater and back seater that you can find.
Morning. Today we're going to run our Alpha Strike, and this is a culmination of your training here at Top Gun. Your task today, fighters, is going to be to get a strike group on and off of a target.
And they did. And we had some remarkable students. And we used to fly the A4s against the students. What we did was, from the day Top Gun began to the end of the Vietnam War, we moved the kill ratio from 2-to-1 to 24-to-1. We got 24 of them for every one of us. Now, how you get there? Smart guys, none of them got out of the Navy until later. The fleet accepted the new Top Gun tactics. The only thing we did was fly in the vertical, which a Phantom had so much power. It was a winner up there. Anybody that's ever flown off carriers and really knowledgeable naval aviator, you know the flexibility, the speed, the sound, the ways of doing deceptive things. Show me something better. There is nothing that I know. And I would be willing to go back in combat tomorrow.
I went to VF-92, the Silver Kings, as a replacement pilot to the America on Yankee Station. And I actually flew in the morning on a cod, went into the ready room, met the skipper, and he said, how are you feeling? I said, great. And he said, that's good. We're a little short on pilots. That's why you're here. If you're up for it, we'll brief in an hour, and we'll be vigilante escort into North Vietnam. I thought that sounded pretty exciting and interesting. I was introduced to my Rio, and so an hour after that, we were banging into the air. So we came back and we landed, nice trap, and Bombardier navigator for the Vigilante was talking, and he said as we approached the target area, we encountered severe AAA that was virtually obstructing the target area. And I'm going, oh my goodness, that's what that was. And then he said, and then they fired 2 SAMs at Kite 2. Fortunately, they went off under his airplane and didn't damage him. And I looked at my Rio and I said, did we have warnings for a SAM launch? And he said, yeah, sure, the full set of warnings, and they launched on us just like the textbook. And I never saw a thing. I didn't see the SAMs, I didn't hear the warnings. It was a very scary thing, and I probably should have been dead. So then 196 missions later, and now we're on the USS Constellation in May of 1972. And on this mission, they've just introduced linebacker. We've been mining the harbors. The Constellation's flying 3 Alpha strikes a day. I'm on the first strike and the third strike. And on the first strike, I'm going to be MIG-cap for the strike group going into a petroleum storage area south of Haiphong. My flight lead, Austin Hawkins, accelerates through the flight group, and we go and position ourselves between the strike force and the intended threat environment. And as it turned out, we were 15 miles away from the target. We can see people rolling in on the target. There were some 100-millimeter air bursts bursting big black clouds out around us. And so we had to move a little farther in, a little farther north. About that time, the Red Crown broadcast on guard, bandits, blue bandits, 040 at 40. We knew that meant that there were MiG-21s coming out of Kep Air Base, which was about 40 miles north of us at the time. And so we motored north and went into Kep Air Base at about 4,000 feet. I was on the left side. I'm looking at the runway as it's coming down. I see 2 MiG-21s holding short. I see MiG-17s and MiG-19s in revetments beside the runway. And about that time, my Rio calls out MiG-21s on the roll, and I look back on the runway, and there's 2 MiG-21s in a section takeoff. With our fighter tactics, I was in the best position to execute the attack, so I called Kite 2's got the lead, burner now, in place port, and our 2 airplanes flipped down and went into a steep dive heading for the end of the runway. As we went down, we leveled off at about 50 feet going down the runway, and sure enough, there's 2 MiG-21s right in front of me, at which point they both broke and went into a hard port turn, very low, under 50 feet. I'm lifting my wings to go over the tops of taller trees as we try and saddle into a half mile behind them and get into a good Sidewinder shot. Came around one, I'm dodging a tree and picking out, and I squeeze a Sidewinder off. Takes about 6 minutes. Actually took 4 seconds, but it seems like an eternity for that Sidewinder to come off the rail. And the Sidewinder made a hard turn towards the inside of the circle, and I thought that it had gone stupid or lost a fin or something. And so I was just pulling in to shoot another one when the Sidewinder came back into the fight, and the 2 MiGs are there, and the Sidewinder came down and went right behind the second MiG and went off and sprayed a bunch of dust on a hill right behind him, but it didn't bring the MiG down. So we came around again. I pulled on again and shot a second Sidewinder. It did the same thing, went inside, got to a lead pursuit, came back, and right at the last minute it turned left and went up right up the tailpipe of the wingman. There's a big orange fireball, and 2 pieces of MiG came out and slammed into the ground, so there was no ejection opportunity. So now I had given the flight lead to Hawkins, but I thought I'd help him out a little bit if he wasn't. I had seen a couple Sidewinders go by, but nothing. So I pulled on and fired another Sidewinder, or what I thought was a Sidewinder, and it went out and did the same thing. And it just, the Sidewinders we were shooting at that time just didn't have the ability to make that last turn on a 7G target. But I did come in and fire one more, and that one went by and again knocked some trees down as we're going. So I needed to straighten out the flight lead. So I'm going to just lob a Sparrow in front of this MiG, and that'll make him turn, and we'll be able to shoot him with the Sidewinder. So I pulled up into him and did a barrel roll attack and came across the top, intending to come here and shoot the Sparrow. But as I got upside down, I'm upside down at about 150 feet, and I look over to my right side, and here's two MiG-21s coming in on us in an attack position. The two MiGs went right over the top of us, and we were doing about 1.2, which we knew that the MiG-21s that Vietnam was flying couldn't fly fast, couldn't fly supersonic below 10,000 feet. So we were feeling pretty comfortable and pretty safe until Jim McDivitt called, there's a MiG-21 coming up behind the flight lead. And so I called kites in place turn. We both turned up towards each other where we can get into a protective situation. The MiG fired an ATOL at Hawkins, and it pulled route and went off right underneath him, but it didn't affect him much, although it took out his radios when we were trying to call him. I, meanwhile, dropped back on the MiG, and I'm following him back to the west. And Jim McDivitt, bless his heart, says, "Curt, what are your plans? We don't have any Sidewinders left, and we're down to 4,000 pounds of gas." I said, "You're right." So I just broke off and headed towards the coast. Went back and made a normal, semi-normal carrier landing. Actually, Hawk took us into the lead, and he did a break, and I did did a reverse, an aileron roll, and then came around and landed. So we got to, it was a big deal on the flight deck, just like all the movies. Everybody's all happy, but you're doing everything you need to do to stay alive in this very hostile environment.
In the 1972 cruise, that was my fourth combat cruise on Midway. I did one on Coral Sea, one on Ranger early on, 66 through 68, on those two carriers. Then went to shore duty and came back and did two cruises on Midway, 71 through 73. Well, I didn't complete the second one. Anyway, in that 72 cruise, of all the 4 deployments I made over there, the most exciting or most impactful thing, I think, in my career, my life, happened in that time. Number one was on May 23rd, 1972, my pilot and I and our wingman launched off on a MiG Combat Action Patrol. The mission of that is to place fighters between the enemy fighter base and where the bombers are going to go in and bomb, so that, because the bombers, while they're in their bombing mode, they're very susceptible to MiG attack. So we were supposed to place ourselves between Kep Airfield up north of Hanoi for the strike going in at Haiphong Harbor. And as soon as we crossed the beach to go to our station, our controller in the ship off the coast said, "We have MiGs 37 miles, 270, 37 miles. I got a contact on the radar and I couldn't lock it up because of the ground, but the closure rate between the MiGs and us was so fast that by the time Muggs called out, he said, "On the nose, 2 to 7 miles," or something like that. He said, "I have a 2. And so we're flying combat spread. When the MiGs came right down between us, we crossed turn to get on their tail, going this way. He says, "Cross turn, we'll go high, you go low." The rookie went down and we went high. Well, what we didn't do, we had our fangs out and we we made a mistake. That's the way it is. Because you should clear behind the MiGs before you turn, because make sure there's nobody else coming. Well, lo and behold, their plan was there were 4 MiG-17s trailing these 2 MiG-19s in there. And their plan was for us to turn on the 17s, which we did, and then we would be between them, and then these 4 here could shoot us down. What they made a mistake also was that they didn't leave enough separation, nose to tail, between the first 2 and the last 4. So instead of breaking between the 2 elements, we broke right into this formation of MiG-17s. And that's when the excrement hit the air conditioning system, so to speak. And Mug said, and I remember he said, "Holy cow," holy expletive, "it's raining MiGs." And so there we were, breaking into this formation of MiG-17s, and that's when we started turning and burning in a fight. MiG-19s had gone, turned around, they came back through the fight and then exited. So we started out fighting 6 of them, we ended up fighting 4 of them. MiG-17s, of course, they could turn inside the radius of an F4, and so we had to fight vertically, and you didn't want to get in a turning system. Well, Muggs tried to turn on one, and I saw, of course, I'm out of the cockpit now, I'm checking our 6. And as he starts to turn on one of them, I look back here, and there's a MiG-17 at our 8 o'clock, and he's tracking this, and he's starting to shoot his 37 millimeter at us. And I yelled, "Muggs, 8 o'clock, tracking and shooting, and do some of that pilot stuff up there." And so as he's turning this one, and he looks back like that, and again, he realized that, this was the real threat, and he was closing. And he maneuvered that airplane so violently that it actually departed controlled flight. And the Phantom just did a backflip. We went nose over tail as this MiG back here. And I'm trying to keep track of the MiG, and I'm going like that. And I said, "What in the hell are you doing up there? I've lost the MiG." And when we'd done a backflip, and the MiG, of course, went on running by us. He finally pulled out like that, and there's a MiG right in front of us. So we take a shot at him. He sees it coming, and he defeats the missile. We turned around a couple more, and we got in position to shoot another one. Again, the missile he defeated it. So here we are, we had four sidewinders, and we'd already taken 2 shots and missed. I thought, oh God, this can be a great day. And then, of course, I'm back here, and then I see one at 4 o'clock. And Muggs, 4 o'clock, tracking and shooting, there's another one. So Muggs pulls real hard on me like this, and this guy just turned up like this. And the MiG-17 has a big bulbous nose, and Muggs knew that when he got in a position like that, he couldn't see over his nose to see what we were doing, because Muggs had been part of a exploitation program called Have Donut, Have Drill, and he had actually flown one of those MiG-17s in that program. So he knew what it would look like from the inside of the cockpit out. And as soon as that guy turned up like that, Muggs went into neutral, put full forward on a stick, and just started pulling negative G's, and we just started building separation between these 2. All of a sudden, this guy, he realizes, hey, they should be coming out here pretty soon where I can get a shot at them, I guess. And he starts looking like that. By that time, we had made enough separation like that, we rolled back in behind him like this, and got a dead shot right up and blew his tail off, and he ejected. So then we started looking around, we don't see anything. In the meantime, while we were doing our stuff up above, poor Rookie and Ken, they had gone down, and they had a MiG on their tail the whole time we were fighting up there, chasing them at treetop level. We saw him coming, so we called him across, say, bring him east or west or whatever it was, and then we rolled down behind him. And here's Rookie, here's the MiG, here's us. And he said, keep turning. He turned the MiG there, and we got our second kill. So we got 2 kills in 1 dogfight against 6 MiGs, and got the hell out of Dodge after that. We didn't see any more action, and tanked and got back to the ship.
When they told us they were going to send 100 plane B-52 strikes to Hanoi Haiphong, I thought, what, really? Our biggest danger is going to be going sterile from all these electrons that are going to be beaming down on us. And they're not going to be shooting at them, they're going to be shooting at us because they can't shoot at them. So I get rest cap. I said, okay, that's not a really good one because hopefully nobody's going to get shot down. Certainly no B-52s are going to get hit, but we have Iron Hand, we have whatever. So we're right at feet wet, feet dry, maybe not even, and a 3-pack of SAMs come up, and all of a sudden I see a big explosion, fire, and crash, flaming debris, and it's a small airplane. It turned out it was VA-82A7, the only 7 lost in linebacker 2, and he'd been one of my students in VT-21. I didn't know that at the time. I thought he had no chance of surviving. He did. He was POW and came back home. But from that point on, I dodged it, and my wingman switched off frequency because he thought it was me. So Black Eagle found, and then when he didn't answer, I thought, well, how did that happen? He got back on, and we got it straightened out. And then I see a B-52 get hit, and it's a very impressive fireball, let me tell you. So, okay, we got customers. This guy, I figured he didn't make it, but now we probably got customers. And I spent the rest of the time just dodging SAMs. They were like, one of the B-52 crew called like fireflies, and that is a very apt description, just trying to stay alive until I had one 4-pack coming at me. Then I didn't know that they did that until I read the linebacker book. Usually they only fire 3, only got 3, but they had a 4-pack, and I was dodging them one at a time, and the last one went off really close, big bang, and it was scary, and nothing hit the airplane. I banged. Usually flying tactical, it's a video game. You hear nothing. I never heard the only time I heard bombs go off was when I dropped 4 2,000-pounders. Heard those go off. I heard it when the flak actually hit the airplane. I guess I need to tell you that story because that was a rather exciting flight. But I realized that no helicopter pilot in their right mind is coming into this maelstrom to pick up anybody. What the hell was I doing here? And I got close enough to Charlie time. I went back to the ship and said, this is crazy. And that was, I was just doing what I was needed to do to dodge the SAMs and realized that this was going to be a pointless exercise. I wasn't going to be helping anybody. I was just going to get myself hurt. Did her, case through recovery. And I'm tooling in at a mile and a half, call the ball. And I said, Clara, can't see the ball, Clara on the ship. I don't even see the ship. And then they keep, giving you, but I had needles and I flew APC. So, I had to stabilize the approach. Approach power compensator maintains your angle of attack. When you move the nose, it's going to maintain that angle of attack on speed. Okay, that you got to be meatball, lineup, angle of attack. So I've got the needle centered, and I've also got in the echo, you have a flight path marker there. So everything was looking good there. And then they cut 3/4 mile, call the ball. I said, auto, Clara, no ship. And the LSO says, Roger, I hear you, keep it coming. And by the time I process that, I see the ball of the ship and land. And it was like almost the time when I saw the flak burst show up in my right windscreen and just stay there. It was that kind of, I trapped and, they taxied up. I'm going to kill the LSO. I'm pissed because that was scary, big time. But by the time you get to the LSO, because you got to go IIC maintenance and then you go to the ready room where they finally came in there and I said, you better have a damn good story for that. I hear you, keep it coming. And he said, well, I did think I was going to see you a little earlier than I did, but you were stabilized on glide slope, auto throttle. I knew you knew who I was. And it's that trust between LSO and pilot. You trust them with your life. You really do. And I hear you, keep it coming. Okay. But it was a little closer than I liked when I got there.
In Vietnam, special purpose missions were vital to survive. The heroism displayed by the search and rescue crews known as SAR were legendary and saved countless lives of those shot down behind enemy lines. Meet James Lloyd, call sign Zeke, who can attest to this legacy.
After a 4-year ceasefire, which started in 1968 above the 20th parallel, North Vietnam, with the aid of China and the Soviet Union, were well prepared and waiting for us. In the 10.5 months that followed, we lost 15 fixed-wing aircraft, which consisted of a third of our A-7s. And like most pilots flying combat missions, I convinced myself that the events that led to the losses of others weren't going to happen to me. But on the evening of August 6th, I was to learn otherwise. Lieutenant Commander Art Bell, our admin officer, and I were assigned to seek out and destroy a large truck convoy that was reported early in the evening up in the Vincennes area heading south. The sun had set and it was dark by the time we crossed the beaches. And little did I know at that time that dark sky was going to play an extremely important role and be a strong ally of mine for the hours that followed. It wasn't long we found our target. I rolled in a 45-degree dive delivery that dropped 2 Mark 82 500-pound bombs on the truck movement. They were, what they looked like from the air was just a fine, thin line of muted headlights. Pulled off, rolled over, inverted to evaluate my hits when I got indication in my cockpit that I was being painted by a Fansong radar, and seconds later it gave me an indication that a SAM missile had launched. I looked off about 10-12 miles away and I could see the fireball of the infamous Soviet-built SA-2 surface-to-air missile approaching 3 times the speed of sound. And our defenses in those days, one of the biggest one is a SAM brake, avoid it. Try to make it stall out, or at least it can't turn with you. Now at night, you have poor depth perception. So if I turned too soon, it would be able to track me. If I waited too late, I'd get caught up in the 500-foot kill pattern. So when I saw the dark center of the nose cone in the fireball, I rolled over and did what we call a split S, pulled down to avoid it. It screamed by me, missing me. But what I didn't know, a second SAM had been launched, went up behind me, blew my left wing off. I was in a steep dive. I don't remember much about the ejection other than the fact when I pulled the D-ring between my legs, the alternate handle, I saw the 2,000 feet screaming through the altimeter, then the red lights of the instrument panel pulled away. Second 2 later, the plane blew up on impact. I shot horizontally, swung twice in the chute, and hit the rice paddies. I don't remember getting out of my equipment, my seat or my parachute or my helmet. I just remember running to get away from the fireball because the 20 millimeter was cooking off and I didn't want to be around when the 500-pounders went off. Plus, the light of the fire was giving me away. Instantly, people came streaming out of the villages, screaming, yelling. And I went, I don't know, a few hundred yards, got behind a little clump about 3 feet high of razor grass, sat in that and kind of tried to evaluate the situation. I was basically in shock. One minute I'm flying an airplane, familiar cockpit, comfort of the cockpit. Seconds later, I'm in the enemy's backyard. I was 150 miles north of the DMZ, 21 miles in from the coast, in an area I was told by a commanding officer no Americans would ever seen again in 10 years. I put mud on my hands and my face to cut down my skin tones and also to hold off the hordes of mosquitoes. And the villagers literally came up within 6 feet of me and didn't see me. After I calmed down a bit, I pulled out one of my survival radios and called Art, who was overhead, and told him I was alive. And he told me that Lieutenant Commander Bernie Smith, our ops officer, who was another outstanding pilot, was coming in to help him out. And then I could hear Bernie talk on the radio, calling me, and when I called back, he couldn't hear me. He just heard static. So he said, "Jim, click me in. 1 right, 2 left," which I did. He came in low, fast, with his lights on, and that's when I realized that everybody around me was armed. Everybody was shooting at that airplane. When he was overhead, "Now turn your damn lights off. I don't want company down here," which he did. And we didn't have GPS. We didn't have night goggles. It was a lot of luck. He told me that a helicopter was on its way in. I looked around, and with all the enemy right around me, and as much as I wanted to get out of there, I told him, "Turn the helicopter back. It's too hot. A slow mover won't make it." I asked for some bombs to be dropped on the other side of the rice paddies, My thinking was they think I was over in the other part of the rice paddy. Well, I'd seen bombs going off for months, obviously, every day. That was the day at the office for us anyway. But I had no idea how devastating they were on the ground. The shock wave and the sound was devastating. But worse yet was the light of the bombs. It lit me up, it lit everybody up around me. I could see literally 100 people, if not more, all around me. I told them to knock it off, that's not gonna work. I'm gonna have to move. And I was a little nervous of leaving that little clump of grass. I felt secure there, but I have to emphasize, I had to get out by daylight. I got out of that little clump of grass, and there was for about 40 minutes, I've been watching 11 North Vietnamese about 40 yards from me, and they would talk loudly. I knew there were 11 because I named each one of them a number, so I keep track of them, because I don't want to get on the radio with one or two standing near me. So I got up out of that, started to move away from that clump of grass, putting their voices behind me, and when they faded to silence, I took off running. I probably went about 1/8 of a mile, got down to call the radio, call in to tell them I'm on the move, that I was heading north only because it seemed to be quieter, when I realized I lost both radios. No radio, no rescue. So as hard as it was, I turned back, I worked my way back. There was clumps of grasses all over the place. I didn't know which one I had to go into. Then I used the voices of those 11 men and vectored myself into the exact clump of grass that I was hiding in. I couldn't see, I just groped around and I found the PRC-90 radio, and the strongest of the two, and it never left my right hand the rest of the night. I retreated a second time and got going, checked in, whatever. I'd be crossing rice paddies, I'd be sliding and falling in the mud, slimy stuff, making all kinds of noise. So I got off on the partitions between the rice paddies and started moving, and I was making good time. So I kept on going, and I'd be going across rice paddies, and there'd be a whole string of North Vietnamese all lined up like a rabbit hunt, beating pans, yelling. I thought I'd heard my name being called, and I didn't know if it was actually my name or a Vietnamese word that sounded like it, because the guys overhead were talking to me. They were my friends, so they were not using my call sign, they were using my name. After about 4 or 5 hours, which almost seemed like eternity, I traveled about, I found out later, exactly 2 miles from where I landed. It was an open field, fairly quiet. So I pulled out my radio and I said, this is probably the best it's gonna get. You go ahead and bring the helicopter in a second time. The A6 that was overhead, it was a commanding officer of our A6 squadron, and his bombardier navigator, Lieutenant Commander Grady Jackson, took over on-scene command. The two A7s had flown over 5 hours, which is a tremendous amount of time for a single seat. In-flight refueled 2 or 3 times, were relieved by Commander Ensche. The planes started stacking up overhead, and that brought in the North Vietnamese. And I thought that's going to be a race to see who's going to get to me first. And the skipper, Commander McCracken of the Helicopter Rescue Squadron, went and personally visited Admiral Rasmussen, who was the commander of Task Force 77, and convinced him that his people could do it. And then when he gave the green light, I was told the air war in Vietnam stopped for one thing and one thing only, and that was to get an A7 pilot out that got in a lot of trouble. An HH-3A helicopter, a Sea King, had been airborne most of the night. One of the other helicopters was Commander McCracken. When he got done with the Admiral, he jumped into the helicopter, and there was 3 of them. And they just took turns refueling on the destroyers and then going back in, up to the coast, waiting for the call in. They did that all night. Well, when I called in, Big Mother 60 was sent in. It was flown by Harry Zinser and Bill Young. And they came in, and when they got in my vicinity, the planes overhead said, Jim, take over vectors. And I could see him coming with all his lights on, and everybody was shooting at him. I got up and ran up and jumped up and down, waved my arms, giving myself away to the North Vietnamese to get his attention, and I was bathed in the floodlight of his landing light. He flew over and disappeared. Everybody, the plane saw me, the North Vietnamese saw me. At the time, the helicopter did not. So I was managed to turn him around with the help of the planes overhead and get back over, and he says, turn on a light, any kind of light. Well, before I could do anything, pencil flares that we carried popped up all around. It confirmed the fact they'd been listening on the radios all night. He said, which one's you? And I said, negative, none of them. Disregard, I'm turning my strobe on, don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot. Well, the strobes all around went off at the same time. Well, he went into a hover a couple, maybe 100 yards away, and I just took off at a dead run. I couldn't see them because I was still lost my night vision, but it sounded like the whole North Vietnamese army was closing in on me. They were right behind me. Ran up to the helicopter, it was hovering there, his cable was down, I hooked on, I didn't have my helmet on, so the noise was devastating. Rocks, mud, flying around, and I closed my eyes and waited to be hauled up. Nothing. Looked up, and the helicopter was sitting right next to me in the mud. He had landed to get below a deflection angle of a AAA gun, a 37 millimeter that was trying to shoot him. And so he got below the deflection angle, and we had a few seconds, and a few seconds only, for me to get on board before they got the gun lowered. And Doug Ankney, and the gunner reached over his gun. I'll never forget the look of his face and his outstretched hand, and him yelling, "Come on, come on." And he grabs the back of my flight suit and pulls me in. Meantime, when we landed, the North Vietnamese thought they shot it down because he landed and they turned the lights off. So they stormed the helicopter. Matt Szymanski on the other side, years later, said he was laying them down like cordwood. And right before we got to the coast, which seemed like forever, 2 missiles went right by the helicopter, probably 50 feet. And we figured they were, at the time, the newer shoulder-mounted heat seekers that would go after slow movers. We avoided those, and then the gunner grabbed my shoulder and pointed down out the open door, and you could see the breakers. We were feet wet. The savior of a Navy pilot.
Over the years, the carrier has secured the United States' ability to respond to the unexpected and support other nations when in crisis. In 1991, naval aviation would once again confront an enemy on the other side of the globe.
Well, my most memorable carrier mission was flying Night 1 in Desert Storm, and I was the flight lead of a 84-plane strike that included all the airplanes off of Saratoga, and I was on USS John F. Kennedy, and also some Air Force Wild Weasels. And our mission was to go in and take down the air defenses in Baghdad when after the F-117's airplanes went in. So we took off, and it was 700 miles up to Baghdad. We had practiced this a few times, but it was pretty exciting because the A-7 didn't have any air-to-air radar. We're flying in the middle of the night. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and you had to rendezvous on these KC-135 tankers. We were putting 6 airplanes per tanker. There were 4 tankers, so there's 24 airplanes all trying to rendezvous in the middle of the night in this one piece of sky. You'd get into the tanker, and we called the tanker the Iron Maiden because it had a short 15-foot hose on it and a lead basket that weighed about 75 pounds. And if you did it wrong, you got slapped with the hose. So you had to plug it about 4 or 5 times as we went up the refueling route before we got dropped off, so that everybody in the flight would have a full tank of gas. And no small feat just to do that, and that was before you even got into combat. And then we came off the tankers and went up to the AWACS frequency, and the F-117s were just coming out of Baghdad. We couldn't cross the line until they dropped their weapons. And all you saw on your radar scopes was all of these radar sites come up. So we proceeded up into country. We kind of did a spoke around Baghdad where there would be 3 airplanes on each one of these spokes. We got up there, we checked in with the AWACS, and you heard the call that there were MiGs airborne at a airfield called Al-Taqaddum, which is just north of Baghdad. And it was actually the target of the A6s who were part of this strike. As we went up, the lead F-18 got a lock on what was a MiG-25 Foxbat. He held lock on him, but he had to break it off as this Foxbat got out of range. And the Foxbat actually came around and shot down Scott Spiker at that time. Scott was a good friend of mine because we had been in Squadron VA 105 previously. I didn't actually see the shoot down. There was a glow up in the sky to the north of me, which I'm assuming was probably him getting shot. But what I do know is that that MiG then continued south and right at me. And I had a full load of chaff, which is reflective, kind of a tinfoil you put out there that decoys airplanes. And I was pumping that stuff out as fast as I could. And the A7 at the time had gotten this new box called the Airborne Self-Protect Jammer. And I believe that thing saved my life because all I could see was that thing going repeat, 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 blinking away. And then over the top of me, it went this Foxbat in full afterburner. And I thought it was one of our Tomcats that had just gotten screwed up and was in the wrong piece of sky. It wasn't. Anyway, proceeded in, and it was a real milk bowl kind of night. Very cloudy, you couldn't see much. And then all of a sudden, about 50 miles from Baghdad, it got clear. And all you saw was this dome over the top of Baghdad, which was their anti-air aircraft weapons all being fired into the sky, and then popping out of the top of it were missiles. It got your heartbeat going pretty good. So I went in, and the first thing that we were told, because we were carrying 3 HARM missiles, which are anti-radiation missiles. They seek the radars of enemy sites. And they said, don't look when you fire these things at night because they're going to be pretty bright. Well, of course, being a good naval aviator, I fired the first one off looking at it and was blind for about 15 seconds because it was so bright. So my first one went off and it went up real high, and it was fired at a pre-brief site that we knew. And then the second one, I was a little smarter and closed my eyes on that one and fired that off. Same thing, went up high and went after one of the missile sites. But the third one was why the A7s were actually there, was because we had a mode called target of opportunity that none of the other airplanes had, which allowed you to pick out a target that hadn't been hit. And so I went to target of opportunity mode and looked at my radar scope, and there was a strange symbol on there that I had never seen before. It was a 6 that was blinking back and forth and whatever. And I said, what the heck is that? And I looked up and there's a missile just kind of coming right at me. It was like, now I know what that is. And I locked on, shot my last HARM, and it, as I talked about the first 2 going straight up, this one went straight down at the radar site that I was over. And I pulled as hard as I could and got out of dodge. The missile missed me, and hopefully the radar site got blown up. So we ended up exiting and getting out of there. One of the funnier parts of this whole thing was we had said to all of the people in the strike group, if you don't feel threatened, then come on out at medium altitude. We were up at about 25,000 feet. But if you feel threatened, the Iraqis aren't going to chase you down low, so go down to 1,000 feet or whatever. And I exited high because it seemed like things were calmed out, but my wingman in a very high-pitched voice was, I'm exiting low. And he was getting out of there. Well, the exiting low part worked great until he got down to the border where I was up high. I couldn't see him, but I kind of knew where he was, and I looked down, and he got near the border, and every little AAA gun and small range missiles were firing at him as he came out, and added to the pucker factor. But we all got back. We got back to the tanker with low on gas, so we all had to plug 3 or 4 times again going back to the aircraft carrier, and thinking that this 5.5-hour flight was about over. Now you had to face the night landing on the aircraft carrier, and fortunately we all got aboard without any issues there. And one of my lieutenant commanders and I parked on the flight deck right next to each other. We both climbed out of the airplane, looked at each other, went, holy whatever, and kind of knelt down and kissed the flight deck. It was probably the mission that you most remember it for the rest of your life.
The legends of naval aviation have proven their commitment to preserving freedom around the globe. These unsung heroes have gone on to push the envelope of impossibilities, from the deck of the carrier to the surface of the moon, and even to the office of the presidency. And like the pioneers who mastered the fusion of both sea and air power over a century ago, a whole new generation of naval aviation continues to carry on and take that torch to new heights and possibilities. As you watch this film, there's a carrier steaming along far off on one of the seven seas. Its mere presence around the world faithfully stands the watch to preserve the peace.
Far in the distance, there's a promise. It seems far